I've got highlighted here a video I made just yesterday, and it's called a quick fix to run the demo FireHub dashboard with only one node. Now that's all well and good, but today I want to show you how to do a proper fix, not a quick fix. So I've got a number of tabs open already. Let's start with the FireHub Pi LAN on node red. We were going to save our known XBs to a global variable, and essentially all we were left with is 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, but we were still coding, we were still using a function block. This concept of storing data to use later is essentially persistence, and we do actually have built into the factory in a box all of the tools to do that, and that is using our database. So let's close some of these YouTube video channel tags that we've got open, or tabs we've got open, and let's look at pgadmin. So you'll find pgadmin at port 8080 on your FireHub device. This version is version 4.28, and I would strongly suggest that you review our Smart Enough Factory Atlassian page and you update your factory in a box following the instructions you'll find in the documentation there. So in our digital twin essentially. So this is version 4.28, and here are the tables under our server FireHub. In our public schema, and down here in our tables, which is for me is already extended, you might find you have to just click on the tab, and we have our tables. Again, you might have to extend them, and this is where we're going to do the work. Now if you've looked at another video which describes the database itself, you'll find that that's where we change these values already in the process dimension that we're going to use. So let's just recap what we did in that other video. Let's look at the table, right click, look at all the rows. We find that we've changed, if you recall, we changed the local ID from sim1 and sim2 to something that meant something for us. Our local ID is now machine 1 and machine 2. Our XB IDs reflect the XB IDs that are fitted to our machines. And here we also have a model name that makes sense to us. We typically use a local ID in the dashboard. Just recall here. So let's look at our dashboard. So our MC1, MC2 appear here. The states of our machines are here, and the ID of the XB is used up here. So what we want to do is change the way we create that global XB ID array with ABCD and FABA in it. We want to use the database. So let's just start by creating a simple select query that we're going to use. We're going to take the local ID, the XB ID, and the model name only, and we're going to query that in pgadmin, and then we're going to use that query in our node red and see how that goes. So let's create the query. We need a query tab. We can't edit the queries in here. I click away, nothing happens. I think if we go objects, let's see, where can we do it? We can do it for a number of places along here, maybe the query tool up here, or we can right click on these things and get a query tool down here. So let's get a query tool, select. We'll just repeat that last one. Okay, if we can't remember the titles of the headings of the columns that we want, we're just going to right click that. We're going to get local ID, XB ID, and model name. So we local ID, XB ID, model name, from, we don't need to use the public dot, because it's a public schema, we can leave that out. We'll just have process dimension. Select to local ID, XB ID, model name for process dimension. Now we're going to add a condition where our current row indicator equals current, because we only want to get current rows. I'm going to show you something here as well. Now I know it starts with a capital C, but we're going to deliberately misspell it, and we'll see if that works. Well, it doesn't. The good thing is that we can see we have a enumerated current, and it's not equal. That input value is not valid. So where does that come in? Well, we have a type called current. If we look at the definition of current, it is an enumeration, and it has two possible labels: current with a capital C and expired with a capital E. So that's the only two choices we have. So that's a good way of making sure that we can't misspell current. And that's another reason for using a database like this, that we can ensure that we have consistent data entry by only allowing certain things to be in there. So let's change that to what it should be, to current. Let's run that and let's see if we get what we want. Okay, we have a little table here with local ID, XP ID, and model name. Again, just for fun, let's show you what you can do with this. Now I think it's double quotes for this database, but we can put something like machine number, so with a space and our own text, and we can do that, and we'll find that we can change the heading here. So we can choose what we're going to have in the column heading by changing them from the original to something new. Let's just go back to the original, and we'll copy and paste this query, and we're going to use that in our Node-RED. So we do happen to have a query running here on a Postgres connection to our database, and we might as well look at that already. And we can see that when we run that query, which happens to be just select version, through the Postgres node we get a returned object, which is let's see, it's an array with only one member. It's an array with an object inside it, and the object is a key value pair of version. There's a key, and the value is this long string that has Postgres in it, etc., etc. So we're going to utilize this Postgres connection. We're going to use a different query, and we're going to see it on the message output. So let's just clear that out of the way. Let's make some room. We'll use another inject node. It's going to be the payload, not going to be a timestamp, it's going to be a string that I've got ready to paste. Let's paste it. It's a bit messy in here. We could use a template to make it a bit neater, but this is just a single line. That's absolutely fine. It'll do. We only want to inject it once. We don't want to repeat. In fact, we don't want to inject it when the flow starts up. We're not going to do that. We're just going to have it so we manually do that. So we could let's put a label on that. Machine data from DB. Let's say XB and machine info from DB. Now that's to inform us what's going on. I just deployed that a little bit early. We really just need to just wire it in. We'll leave it with the same message output, and let's see what we get. So let's deploy that. Got to wire it in, inject it, and see what happens. Well, we get an output. The message payload of that output is an array with two members, two objects, and that is what we got from our database. We've got one row output. I don't think we can do much else about that. Let's see, split results, one row per message. Now if we change that to split result set, I'm not quite sure how that splits. Perhaps if we looked at the help for this thing, we could actually get some potential better help on that. But it's worth pursuing that if you want to find out what goes on. We did also see in another video that the rows per message, we updated all these nodes and these Postgres nodes, and when we updated it, this is a new feature and it wasn't highlighted, so we got a red triangle. If you see a red triangle on any of these nodes, it's actually not configured properly. So that means we need to do something about it. So it looks like it does what we want it to do. But ideally we're replacing this save known XBs to global variable. So remember, but if you notice here, we check if this XBs array is undefined, and then we make a new one and we set these values to this string, this fixed string. So let's see, we're not going to do it from a fixed string, we're going to use our returned XBs. We're going to do that we're going to have this exact format, we're going to call it XBs, and we're going to create it with the real ones that are on the machine. So we've nearly got it here. We've just got, if we remember in our debug messages, we have this array from this query, but we only need the XB IDs, and we don't want them in this format, in these two arrays. We want to pull out and flatten it so we just get these two next to each other. Now that's a job for JSON-ARTA. It's actually fairly straightforward. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, so we know that the output of this from this Postgres node is this result, this array. So let's now use a change function in order to modify it. So let's see what we can do. So I'm going to drop it on the board, on the editor. I'm going to wire it in. I'm going to wire the other end to this debug object, and then we're going to fill it in. So we're going to set, well, let's set a message payload. Well, actually, do you know what? We can leave it as message payload for now. We actually want to set a global value, the global.xbs, but let's leave it as payload for now in order to check what's happening. So we're going to set it to our value, and here we can now use a JSON-ARTA expression. Now JSON-ARTA flattens this, so let's just try XB ID. Now it accepts that, but there is an issue, and the issue is that this XBID is actually inside an array. So have we properly addressed where it is? So let's say done and deploy, and then when we inject this query, we should get two responses. Okay. The second one says undefined, so the payload in the second one is undefined. Okay, so we haven't quite referenced it properly, but the first one's like this. Now the clue is that in here is that actually we haven't just got an array on its own, it's actually part of the payload. So let's just do one thing here, and that's just trying to make this a bit more clear that there's a message object and the payload is only one part of it. So it's the message object that this function works on, but we're not actually giving it enough information to find the XBID. So now we see the complete message object. We'll deploy that. Let's put that in the bin. Deploy that, and let's inject again. So this time we see that the whole message is a bit bigger. That actually, and in fact here's a second one, this second object. It's an empty array. Let's just see what comes out of this. We have the message object. The payload's actually in here itself, and that itself is an array with two objects in it. And then there's a topic that's not defined. I think this is actually a repeat on that one. Okay, so that's potentially the query parameters, we actually, as far as I can tell, I think this is a result of this one, and now it's gone to nothing. So those things hung around, and that's all gone. So there's no payload in there at all. So that's that undefined payload essentially. So when that's what the undefined message was. That there's no payload. So this didn't work. And set message payload is actually not what we did there really. Well, that's not quite true. We did, but there was nothing to set it to. So let's just see what went wrong. Well, I can tell you it's here, and that's because we forgot to reference it properly. Now, it's actually part of payload. So the right way to do this would be to put the word payload in front. And now we should find that it finds it. So we say done, deploy. We'll try and get rid of that. And then we'll inject this again. And now we find we have, in our second result, a payload. Well, the payload's still an array with 2, but this payload, has 2 objects. This payload has just 2 strings in it, and that's exactly what we want. So let's just look at the payload response. So I'll go back and change this back. Just bear in mind what went on here. So instead of the complete message object, we'll look at message payload. We'll deploy it. We'll inject again. And now all we're seeing is the payload part of that whole message. And the payload in the first one are these 2 objects with these 3 key value pairs. And the second one is just what we want. And we want to have that as our XB IDs in our global variable. So this is going to take the place of this. So we're not going to need that anymore. So let's neaten this up a little bit more. We'll give it a name. We'll call it save known XBs to global variable, just as we did before. And we're not going to set the message payload. We're going to set a global variable called XBs, just like last time, or just like the other string does. So before we do that though, one thing we can do as well is that we can actually use wildcards in this JSON outer expression. We know that XBID is what we want, but say we didn't know what it was called, we could actually just put, and it's the only place it exists, so we're not going to mix it up with any other XBID, we could just put a wildcard in there and that will work just as well. So let's just use the wildcard. Now we have it here. Now this isn't necessarily going to show the payload. We're not going to necessarily see the global variable here. What we're going to do here is let's just destroy this link. Let's deploy this. I think that should be enough. This isn't gonna be injected immediately, and we've still got the global variable defined. We'll see if it persists between deployments. We'll know that when we start to see error messages. Now that's been deployed. We haven't seen any mistakes or any error messages there. Let's just check. Now the problem is, as soon as I inject this, it will potentially write that to a global variable, but that's by the by. We can fix that up. Let's just check that now. We didn't quite get what we wanted here. Let's have a look. These are standard XBIDs. Now potentially that's possible it hasn't worked. No, sorry, that's actually has worked. Why am I saying that? Well, these nodes, all of them, and the wire and the wiring between them, the data flows along them. And what's happening is that this this whole thing is acting on, and from here it's acting on the same message object. Now, in the first time we did that, we actually changed the payload, which was originally this payload, to something new. We overwrote it. That's why it ended up as undefined. This time around, we've actually created a global variable, or we've set a global variable using this thing, and we didn't touch the payload. So the original payload flowed through. That's why we now see two payloads here, or two essentially the same payload again here. Now, I don't think even that message object includes the XBs, because the prefix of this is message, the prefix of this is global. So let's just live with that. We don't necessarily need to see that output there. It can just stop there. We don't need to have anything happen after that. We could have a success out of that, I guess. We don't need to do anything else. I think we can deploy this. It'll work. What we'll do though is we'll look at the global variables, and that's under context data, and we have these XBs here. So if we delete that, we should start to immediately get some errors. Here we go. Here are our errors. Let's inject that query. We injected it, we got a response, and that basic response is our original response to the basically what the query sent us, which is essentially this array with the objects representing the rows and the keys as what would be the column names, or what are the column names, not would be. And because we've stopped all those error messages, I'm pretty confident the thing that we look at our context data and we refresh our global variables, we'll find that our XBs have been recreated. So this pair has worked in the same way. Now, if we want it to happen automatically, what we'll do here is we'll inject this at the start, so we can maybe give it a decent name. We can say get XB and machine info from DB. We don't get a topic, so we can put that one in the bin. But this time we're going to inject it once after 0.1 seconds, and then we're not going to repeat it. So this will happen when this flow kicks off. So immediately the flow kicks off, we'll always have an XB there. So we've done that one. We don't need this one here. So let's just move that up. Let's give it this a little bit more formatting. Postgres, get XB and machine info from DB. We can do all sorts of things with this. We can make them a lot neater if we want. Make it a bit even. Let's deploy that. And now we find that everything is working as normal. And so this change function has changed and set a global variable. Let's see if we can actually use a debug message to see a global variable. Let's see if we can actually just plonk that on there, and let's change this to instead of saying message, let's see what we've got. Complete message object expression. Maybe we could use an expression to say payload. How about global? Global dot xbs. How about that? How about that? We forgot to actually do it, didn't we? Deploy that again. That's not quite right. I think global is when we've got a capital G, because we have an undefined here. Where does that one come from? That happened to come from here. So yes, global variable. Maybe it starts with it's got a capital. Let's just check that here. For context data, global capital G. This one save known. Oh, got global. Small letters. Let's see if we can pull it out. Let's put in here, instead of bothering with that, let's just see if we can say what XBs is. I'm not holding out a lot of hope for this, but we know that it saved it to the global variable. Just nice to know if we could see what comes out the other end now. But possibly because this works on messages, that we're not actually accessing a global variable, and in fact the clue is actually in the one I deleted. It will be we need to get global variables. In fact, I think if we look at the data, this one here, we'll potentially see the function. Where are we? In the dashboard. One of these functions will, here we go, XBs is global get XBs. So we maybe need a global get in order to access that variable. There we go. We've given it a try. Did we deploy it? I don't know. Let's see. Clear that out of the way. We just get undefined. Well, that's okay. We'll neat it up. Get rid of that. Deploy it again. When it's deployed, we get that. This triggers, and so we get straight away that. If we turn that off and deploy again, we'll now, this sets our deployed state, and we don't get that extra one here. If I just move something around, it tells me that it's ready to deploy. That's been changed. Deploy, and no messages because that was turned off by default. There's still a problem though, and that is if we inject the select version, because, well, maybe it's best to just show you what happens if we inject that. So let's just inject our select version. So we do that, that's great, we get an object, but now we're starting to get errors. What's happened? Well, let's just have a quick look at our global variables. If I refresh that, we'll find it's disappeared, and that's because this string, or this select query, this node here returned the results of that one, and it didn't just go to the payload. It went down here where it tried to save those known XBs to a global variable, and if we notice in here, there was nothing called global XBs. There was nothing to actually write it to. There was nothing in there. It's empty, So, two things we can do. We can either prevent this select query going through here, and we would have to sort of maybe look for a feature in that to stop it, or we could very simply create another Postgres connector here. Quickest and easiest way possibly is just another Postgres node. So if we just copy that one and just do Control C, Control V, pop it down here, wire it in, and delete these wires as before, deploy that, and this time we've got our XBs, and we can hit this as often as we like, and it won't affect the XBs. We can hit this as often as we like, and all it will do is, if we look at context data and refresh that, it's not going to delete it. It's just going to create it here. Again, we can delete it. We'll start to get error messages. Go back to context data, refresh, it's not there, inject it. I think I hit that. I'll just check if I did. No, missed it. Let's hit that, refresh. We've created our global variable again. So that's it. That's how we should get our data from our Postgres database, using it for our persisted data, and actually that's how we interact with our dashboard data. So our dashboard, that we can see here, has the right machine names in here. It has data from each machine that's on. This one's been off all the time. Number of parts we've made per hour has been going in, and we can see that that we've now been able to remove that need to hard code the variables. Now there are some areas where we need to do this some more, but essentially that's what we've covered. Incidentally, we've also covered a little bit of how the data flows through these flows. It sort of starts off top left and works down, and all these flows, the test flow, the data input, and the dashboard, they're all running at the same time. So essentially data is flowing through all of these from top left to bottom right through the wires and being acted on as it goes from the message objects, the whole message object. And we also, if we recall, we also looked at the message payload as well to make sure that we realize that the payload is only a small part of the entire message, and we can add bits to it as well. If that wasn't clear, we could actually create other parts to these messages and use those later on. So thank you, and I hope that's helped you get more out of your factory in the box.